Thank you. I'm honored. Uh, Thank you very much to the Universal Peace Federation and the International Media Association for Peace UK for hosting this important event, which unfortunately I cannot attend in person in lovely London. On purpose, we didn't coordinate details of our remarks ahead of time, and so you will now hear some overlapping with some speakers that already spoke today. And I'm quite glad of this because this shows the liberty in truth. This shows that liberty in truth is the true key of this kind of meetings, and because and shows that we have kind of same sensibility. Ladies, gentlemen, religious persecution is the most alarming news of the world we live in, and yet most people are not aware of it at all. Acting as a filter, um, media act as a filter, which play a sensorial role by selecting the news to be shared with the public. Within the broader framework of religious persecution worldwide, Christianity is the faith that suffers the most significant persecution in numerical terms. This may seem surprising to many. Christianity is certainly not a small, obscure local religion. It is the faith with the largest number of adherents across the entire globe. And yet, it is truly the most persecuted religion. The fact that the general public remains unaware of this dire reality is again due to the filter that is the de facto censorship imposed by the mass media. Let us talk, for example, as was already mentioned, but I want to repeat it, let us talk of Nigeria. In that African country, Christians are subjected to constant harassment and violence with a high number of victims. Yet Nigeria is almost absent from the foremost television newscasts and the pages of widely circulated newspapers. In such cases, the organs of information become organs of disinformation. Religious persecution in the world can be divided into two macro areas. I will briefly describe them, citing some clear examples, and among all cases, my examples will be chosen from those I have personally dealt with directly in my work at Bitter Winter magazine. The first of these two macro areas includes countries and territories where totalitarian regimes and despotic governments openly persecute religious groups and individuals. It is the part of the world where rogue states are so arrogant that they do not need to disguise or conceal their blatant war against all forms of religion, spirituality, creed, or belief. My example here is the People's Republic of China. About religious faiths, the Chinese regime, led by the Chinese Communist Party, is based on a theoretical premise. Religion is a natural attitude, and following a natural evolutionary process, it will eventually die out. Yet the regime seeks to accelerate the process, and it does so in two ways: by infiltrating religious groups and churches to cynicize and control them, and by conducting violent persecution. These two approaches target all groups indiscriminately: Christian house churches, underground Catholics, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, and new religions such as Falun Gong and the Church of Almighty God, to name just a few. Often religious persecution is also conducted against non-Han ethnicities whose cultural identity revolves around religious elements. This is the case for Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongols, and others. Violent persecution of these groups includes a lengthy list of atrocities: unlawful arrest and deportation, imprisonment in labor camps, indoctrination in re-education camps, violation of the sanctity of the households and family, torture, segregation, rape, and even suspicious deaths in custody occurring daily. Another brutal practice used to eradicate religions and destroy ethnicities is forced organ harvesting, with the regime operating or even actively supporting a massive, highly lucrative and deeply immoral business of extracting organs from political prisoners sentenced to death, and often while they are still alive, to feed a horrifying black market. Once again, the mass media are often complicit through omission, hesitating to report on this vast and devastating scourge, allowing it to persist unnoticed by the wider world. But violent persecution in rogue state is, as I mentioned, only one side of the problem. The second macro area of religious persecution is that which occurs in democratic countries of the free world. Yes, the news of the day is that religion is persecuted even in democracies. Many dismiss this idea outright, labeling it an exaggeration. After all, they argue, democracies are founded on tolerance and inclusion. And yet, how is it possible that the very systems built to protect freedom can instead display intolerance and actively persecute faith? This becomes entirely possible when the free world hijacks the very concept of democracy through relativism. Relativism is the modern and postmodern notion that proclaims that the relativity of everything, every value, principle, idea, judgment, and evaluation, except, ironically, the principle that everything must be relative. In practice, this makes relativism dogmatic, while the relativity of everything leads to the irrelevance of whatever value those in power dismiss. Those who wield power enforce a new consensus sanctioned by a newly constructed legality. Meanwhile, abandoning its duty and moral responsibility, the press easily becomes a tool to censor truth, dogmatize relativism as the will of the powerful, and legitimize this manufactured consensus and legality. In a world governed by relativism, those who stand firm upon absolute principles and values, such as religions, whatever principle and values they cherish, become the primary adversaries. In liberal democracies, societies characterized by democratic relativism, religion is not persecuted openly but subtly marginalized. Theoretically, religion itself is not regarded as the enemy in such a society. Only those forms of religion considered exaggerated or extreme are treated as enemies, precisely because of their intrinsic hostility to relativism, which is itself constructed as an inherent rejection of democracy. But who can define what is exaggerated or extreme? According to which criteria or standards? And can a secular actor, alien to religion and even its sophisticated adversary, legitimately decide what constitutes excess within a domain to which it does not belong? Here, the unfortunate habit of wielding the term cult at will against religious groups comes into play. Yet scholars and specialists deliberately avoid the term cult because it is vague, offensive, and blunt. No scientific, accepted, and value-free definition of cult can be calmly employed in academic or legal context. Cult invariably serves as the brand of the other, especially when there is a need to stigmatize difference. The term is deployed precisely because it generates consensus and attracts attention. It frightens just enough to dominate and intimidate sufficiently to impose control. The situation becomes even more complex when private actors form a symbiotic alliance with state institutions. While many private actors may be involved, the scenario becomes particularly grave when NGOs, lobbying groups, and the media enter the scene. It becomes critical when these entities intertwine and mutually reinforce falsehoods about cults merely through repetition. Private actors often function as ideological subcontractors of the state, exerting pressure to delegitimize specific religious communities. Consider the case of France, democratic France, in the heart of Europe, where the Mission interministérielle de vigilance et de lutte contre les dérives sectaires, MIVILUD, of the Interministerial Mission for Monitoring and Combating Cultic Deviances operates, an ostensibly neutral government agency whose activities systematically target minority religious groups marked by theological or social nonconformity. Its periodic reports, Mivilud's periodic reports on cults, significantly influence law enforcement priorities and judicial decisions. Some might argue that, after all, those targeted are cults, that is, marginal groups that are admittedly strange. In truth, it always begins with the cults because they are an easy target for propaganda and invariably ends by affecting everyone. France offers a telling example. Just 2 years ago, the Minister of Education intervened through a task force tasked with enforcing secular values, threatening suspensions and disciplinary action when a few children deemed it appropriate to say a prayer before lunch in a public school. In Japan and in South Korea, the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, formerly known as the Unification Church, faces intense governmental attacks using unprecedented means. What is happening in these countries has been defined and is religicide, the systematic assassination of religion itself, trying to eradicating it in the mind and spirit of the people. In South Korea, not only is the Family Federation targeted, raids and arrests of prominent leaders have struck numerous Protestant Christian churches, sometimes mega churches with thousands of affiliates, such as Yoido Full Gospel Church, Saranjail Church, Seguro Church, and the Far East Broadcasting Company, an international Christian radio network. Another striking example, and I'm going to my conclusion, of democratic persecution against religion is the case of Taijimen in the Republic of China, Taiwan. Taijimen is a menpai similar to a school of Qigong, martial arts, and self-cultivation, with teachings centered on conscience. In 1996, corrupt bureaucrats targeted the movement, accusing it of fiscal evasion and, absurdly, even of raising goblins through black magic. Taijimen committed no crime, a fact confirmed not by me, but by every level of Taiwanese justice, culminating in the 2007 Supreme Court ruling, which fully acquitted them of all charges. Yet, the same corrupt bureaucracy continues to demand money from Taijimen, having meanwhile nationalized its sacred land as compensation. Now, my final point. Where is the press in all this? And in countless other cases, the press is supposed to be the watchdog of democracy. But when it becomes the pet of anti-religious power, when it abandons its moral duty and censors truth, democracy itself dies. Thank you.